Hello and welcome to The Last Word on Spurs. We hope you're keeping very, very safe and well. Thank you so much for joining us as we bring to you a January transfer window update on a day where Tottenham have made their first signing of the January window. I can hear the celebrations in the background. I know it's arguably not the one we wanted first, but we've got one over the line. And hopefully, I think I saw Matty say this on social media, like London buses, we're hoping another one is following very, very soon. Before we introduce our special guest we've got on, joining me tonight, my co-host for the show, located somewhere differently for this show, different location completely. We've got the wonderful Matty Hayes, based over in Copenhagen. Matty, how are you, bud?
I'm all good, all good. It's we've done a lot of these shows this month, Ricky, so it's nice to have actual news of a signing to get us through this one. And of course, fantastic to have another esteemed guest on with Dharmesh tonight. So I'm looking forward to getting into the news.
Yeah, absolutely. We're delighted to be joined by tonight. Look, you see this man on your screen, I know every day, probably every hour at the moment, every minute, especially if you're Spurs fans, we're glued to his station, waiting for news, waiting for something on Tottenham. We're joined by the wonderful, iconic presenter, broadcaster, journalist. We've got the brilliant Dharmesh Sheth back on Last Word on Spurs. Dharmesh, how are you, my man?
Thank you so much. What an introduction.
Well,
I thought you were going to quit when he said esteemed. I would have taken that, and then you went on, so I appreciate it. No, lovely to be on again. Thank you.
My pleasure, my friend. My pleasure. Like I say, lovely to bring you on at a time where Dharmesh, it's pretty quiet at Spurs at the moment. Nothing really much going on. I mean,
nah. Quiet window as usual.
Yeah, we picked the times right. We picked the times right to bring on the wonderful journalists like yourself, Dharmesh. Fair to say, lots happening at Tottenham right now. We know, obviously, we've got one player over the line. We are going to come on to him very, very shortly. But given the nature of Tottenham Hotspur at the moment and everything surrounding the football club, it feels only appropriate, Dharmesh, that we start with the main man. Some would say he's not the main man. That's obviously Antonio Conte, the manager, and what you personally feel, Dharmesh, the future might hold for him. Now, I think it's fair to say that early Sunday morning, shockwaves were going around the Spurs fan base where close confidant of his, Damasio, stated on social media that with certainty Antonio Conte would be leaving Tottenham at the end of the season. He suggested that the club didn't like the frequent jibes. Conte wants players to win, while the club prefers to trade. The feeling within the club is that it simply has not clicked and that Antonio is missing his family. About 4 or 5 hours on from that, we got an amendment to that story where Damasio said Conte and the Tottenham board do enjoy a good relationship. The manager's contract will expire June the 30th, obviously, of this year. And at the moment, this situation has been asked to be put on standby with relation to his contract. And I know he was on, I think, yesterday, Dharmesh, Sky Sports News, where he said, at the moment, we'll wait to see what happens in the next few weeks with regards to a decision on his future. So given all of that, Dharmesh, and despite the fact that he said that he was proud to be Tottenham's manager after the win against Fulham on the Monday evening, do you expect Conte to be at Spurs until the end of the season and potentially beyond?
Nice, easy one to start with. Cheers, Ricky.
Injury gently, as always.
Look, I just think that with regard to Antonio Conte, it's almost the moment he walked into the door at Tottenham. Yes, Tottenham fans were excited. It was a new dawn. It was like he's a winner. He wins everywhere he goes. But there was always in the back of everyone's mind, is he going to stay here for the long haul? And that's been from day one since he arrived at the club. And I mean, Tottenham fans must be bored of talking about it the whole time. I'm sure in the past couple of seasons, they've been bored when, the media go on and on and on about Harry Kane. We just seem to be going on and on and on about Antonio Conte. And it's interesting because his press conferences and his interviews are the most, what you'd say, analysed almost more than any other manager. It's like what he says, but everyone's thinking, but what does he actually mean by what he said there? He said, yeah, I'm happy, but does that mean he's staying? Does that mean he's going? There was a soundbite we ran about 3 weeks ago where he said, I'm happy about 12 times in the space of a minute and a half. And even off the back of that, we were thinking, he's happy, but is he happy? He's just said it 12 times, or is he just really labouring that point? Look, Gianluca Di Marzio is close to Antonio Conte. So, yes, there was that amendment. And I think without hiding behind it, sometimes things get lost in translation. And I know that, you get on Twitter, you'll find people just picking out a certain line and aggregators will put that line out and say, well, this is what he said. But in the context of what Gianluca was saying in that interview on Sky in Italy, it was more the feeling he was getting from Antonio about his position, about the relationship he has at Tottenham, about the way moving forward at Tottenham. I just think that Antonio Conte is the only one who's going to make that decision. Of course he is. He will eventually decide whether this is the long term for him or not. I don't think it's as simple as, if he doesn't get backed in the January transfer window, if he doesn't feel like he's going to get backed in the summer transfer window. I think, given what Di Marzio was saying there are a lot of other factors involved in this. He lost 3 very, very close friends of his who passed away very, very recently. That's affected him. And you can see him in some of these interviews. You can see that he's still feeling that, and it has affected him. It would affect anybody. And the family situation as well, where his family are in Italy and he's here in London. These are all contributory factors aside of the issues that he might have with the board and whether he feels he's going to get backed, whether he feels what Tottenham's long-term project is. Is it to win straight away? Is it to bring in young players, sell them on at a profit? That is part of the whole equation. It's not the whole equation. So I know I'm dancing around your question because there's no definitive answer here just now, but there is obviously something that's going on there behind the scenes at Tottenham, because we simply wouldn't be talking about it all the time, because there is that issue with Antonio Conte where he joins a club and we know he's a winner, but he wants that success instantly. It's like, was he the right fit for Tottenham? Some people have asked. You know, in the same way they ask, is Graham Potter the right fit for Chelsea, when in the summer they've spent £270 million and then sacked the manager who they bought those players for, and then appoint Graham Potter, who is a project building manager. And yet he's been given £270 million worth of squad. And people will say, they've got no sympathy for that because it's £270 million. But the fact of the matter is, he didn't have anything to do with those players coming in. So it's to do with, fits for certain clubs. I think that Conte was brought in because Tottenham decided to go down that route, that he's a winner, he can bring a trophy. Now, people I speak to who speak to him a lot when he was in Italy have relayed to me that they don't think he would leave unless he won something, because he wants to win everywhere he goes. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be the case at Tottenham, whether they win something or not this season, but that's the view of the people who have worked with him and interviewed him on a regular basis when he was in Italy, that he's a winner and he wants to win wherever he goes, and he wouldn't leave Tottenham without doing that. I just think there are a lot of other factors involved here before he decides on that future. I
know you was quoted, Dharmesh, on another show saying that Antonio Conte won't leave Tottenham until he wins a trophy.
No. Let me just...
Go on.
It's exactly what I've just said here. So you know what I was saying? Like, you get like a lot of Twitter handles of aggregators who will put out a quote.
Okay.
So the quote said, Antonio Conte will not leave Tottenham unless he wins something. And it's my handle underneath. And I'm like, right. I actually did say that. But before I said that, I said, I've spoken to people in Italy and journalists in Italy who have told me that they believe Antonio Conte will not leave before he wins something. But why let that get in the way of a good headline?
No, it's important to clarify that. I mean, I think the thing is, Dharmesh, I think the feeling is that he could be in for a very, very long time. Hopefully it doesn't take him that long. Hopefully he's got it's the FA Cup or the Champions League this season. Because it is interesting, Dom. I mean, I'm going to bring Matt in a second to ask you about Paratici, but Gary Neville the other night, your esteemed colleague on Sky, him and Carragher were kind of debating about Conte and ENIC and Levy and the chair and the situation with Tottenham. And Gary was right to some degree to say, well, look, Spurs are 3 points off the current top 4, given there's a couple of games in hand. We are in the next stage of the Champions League, AC Milan to come, still in the FA Cup. Why is there a feeling that there's so much happening that isn't right around Tottenham. And I think the reality is that there's so much noise around there. And I think it's because of the situation where Conte has only got a few months left on his contract. And you are getting, like I say, some of these negative reports coming out suggesting that his time is coming towards an end at Tottenham. I think, as I've said to you off air as well, is that there just seems to be maybe a lack of communication in and around the club. And had we got some top communication and understood where things are and that we are aligned as a club, I don't think we'd be having the situations that we're having right now. But because of a lack of communication, generally at the moment, the supporters want clarity and answers. Spurs fans in general want clarity and answers. I think that's why we're seeing at the moment there's just this real lack of unity in and around the club. And we saw last season at the back end of it, Dharmesh, which I know you saw as well and experienced it, that Spurs were at their best towards the end of the season when they got the top four because everyone was together.
Yes. What I would say, and this is probably a question to you guys, because look, there is all of this perceived negativity surrounding the club. And as you mentioned, they're only 3 points off the top four. They're into the round of 16 in the Champions League. They're still in the FA Cup. They're fighting on three fronts effectively. But would there be this much negativity, and how much of it has been accentuated by the fact, I'm not going to say the name, that the A word is at the top of the league? Because that cannot be helping. If Tottenham were in this position now where we were having this debate about Conte, about signings, about the long-term strategy, would it have been as negative had Arsenal been struggling this season, say in the bottom half of the table, as opposed to, well, it's their title to lose as it stands at the moment? And I know Tottenham fans don't want to hear it, but how much has that accentuated the negativity surrounding Tottenham? Because the natural thing to do is, yes, things are negative at the club, but it's the natural thing to do is then to compare themselves to your biggest rivals. And that's what's always going to happen. And your biggest rivals just happen to be top of the league, having pipped them to the top four, half a year ago. And it's been such a turnaround since then. So, I mean, I should be asking you that question in a way, because you're going to all the games. You're probably feeling the negativity in the ground sometimes. And people, the murmurings of, I don't like this, I don't like the way they're playing, what's happening with Conte. But I'm sure there's an element of, look what's happening with those guys who are top of the league just now.
No, it's very true. I mean, I do agree with you that have Arsenal not be where they are in the league and just the nature of a turnaround within 6 months, definitely, I think there wouldn't be as much negativity as there is at the moment. Adding to that negativity, unfortunately, has been very nice to Matt. Matty, over to you.
Yeah, look, Conte isn't the only Italian man whose future at Spurs has been thrown into doubt in the last week or so. And speaking, of course, about the director of football, Fabio Paratici, who last week there was a decision made by the Serie A FIGC prosecutor after an investigation into Juventus that Paratici would be banned from Italian football and all involvement in that for 30 months, so 2.5 years. There was also a request to FIFA and UEFA for that to be extended to Europe and worldwide ban as well. Like, the initial worry for Spurs was that, I think there was a few reports early on that it was immediately effective in England. That isn't the case at the moment, but there are reports out there that could become the case very soon if FIFA and UEFA are to make a decision on that. So, Dharmesh, I suppose firstly, can you give us the latest on what is going on there with that decision by the Serie A's governing body? And I suppose on a personal basis, do you think there could still be a job for him at Tottenham if this goes a bad direction for him?
Look, it's very difficult to comment on something that's still live just now. And I've seen the reports, as you have, that this suspension is going to stretch to, worldwide. It's going to be a global suspension. That hasn't been confirmed yet. So it's very difficult for me to say yes, and then speculate from that on Paratici's future at Tottenham. Look, if it does stretch onto that, I think they'll have to deal with that situation as and when it comes. But I mean, it just adds to the uncertainty, doesn't it, for Tottenham and their fans, and the negativity, I guess, that's engulfing the club, even though there are reasons to be positive in some areas as well. But with regard to Paratici, he's employed by Tottenham and he's free to work for Tottenham until further notice. And I don't think it will be fair to really start speculating on what is effectively a legal issue until that whole issue is resolved and the decision is come to. But I mean, he was at the Fulham game. He was sat in the press area, I think, or the director's box. So he was there. He's still visible, probably not as visible as he has been since everything's happened, but he's there. So I just think that while there is that uncertainty, it's very difficult to comment on something that it'll be unfair really to comment on. But I get where you want to go with this, because it will add to the uncertainty with Conte as well, because we know that those two work together. Conte trusts Paratici. They do their recruitment together. So depending on what happens with Conte and Paratici, it is looking a little bit uncertain for Spurs. I agree.
I think the concern as well, and I know you, Dharmesh, you can't comment on this, which is absolutely fine. It's just to make that point. So, listen, great viewers and listeners that are listening to this show, that we know that Paratici and Conte, their relationship goes to the point where he is the direct link for Conte to the board. So, at the point where if there is a discussion that needs to be had in relation to signings, departures, anything around the football club, Antonio will be speaking to Fabio, who will then obviously address that with Daniel. So it does make, I think...
But what was this, just to interrupt you there, Ricky, what was interesting, was the other day when he did that news conference, or was it an interview?
Yep.
And he was almost like saying, look, in Italy, the sporting director is very visible. He'll be doing interviews. Other people will be doing interviews. People like the chief executive, the owner, whatever. It's a very, very normal thing to happen in Italian football. You always see it. You know, like if I'm researching a story and I'm trying to find out if there's been any quotes on a particular story that I'm following, more often than not, if it's an Italian club or a European club that's involved, you normally see a quote from like the president of the club or the chief executive of the club. Whereas here, all of the quotes seem solely directed towards the head coach or the manager. And he was almost saying, I'm not used to this, you know, even though he was at Chelsea before and was there for a couple of seasons. So he would have been used to one element of it and he would have been there. But the majority of his time he's been in Italy, where the director of football, the technical director, the owner, the chief executive are very, very high profile, and they're very public in what they're saying. And they stand up in front of the cameras, whereas he feels everything is done in the background. And then there's a news conference once or twice a week before a game and after a game. And he's the one who's having to speak for the whole club. And he always says, I'm not the club. I'm just the head coach. I picked this team and I try and help this team win. So I do have a degree of sympathy for him there. But on the flip side, I think he knew that this was the way it works here in England. And journalists are going to ask Antonio Conte, the head coach and the manager, the questions, because it's the culture here that the chief executive, the owner, are not always readily available to be making those comments. And it goes back to what you guys were saying, where you wanted more communication. I think that is in alignment with what Conte was saying, because he almost is agreeing with you there.
Yep.
In the communication wise, there's one thing the head coach and the manager saying it, but it means something else if the chief executive or Daniel Levy or the owner suddenly come up and put themselves in front of the camera and say, okay, this is what's happening.
Yep. Again, like you say, Dharmesh, we'll have to probably wait and see what happens in relation to that situation. One to keep an eye on, of course, again, it has to eventually come to some form of a conclusion, because we know there's an investigation. So we shall wait to see on that. We know Juventus have appealed that as well. Just another story, Dharmesh, before Matty brings in about Tottenham's first signing. Lovely to be saying that, first signing of January. We have heard from several reports, Dharmesh, that talks are continuing between Tottenham and QSI over a minority investment in the Premier League, with percentages up to 15% being mooted. Now, club chairman Daniel Levy, we've heard reportedly, believes Spurs are worth at least the same as Chelsea, considering the club's state-of-the-art stadium, training ground, London location, and the frequent qualification in the Champions League in recent years, meaning that evaluation, according to a report that we've seen, has been up at 2.5 billion. That's the figure that's being quoted. I'm just keen to know from your perspective, Dharmesh, I'm not sure how much you can say or what you know about this, but how much do you think we should be paying attention to these stories? And do you think any potential investment could happen in the near future?
I mean, it's clear that Tottenham would be welcoming some kind of investment to help with, you know, recruitment and player signings and in transfer windows. Just picking up on this reported 2.5 billion that Daniel Levy is purported to have said that they're worth, comparing them to Chelsea. Look, I'd have a tendency to agree with him in one way, in that what is being talked about with the stadium and the training ground. Look, you guys go to the stadium every other week. I've got to say, I've only been there about 4 or 5 times, but I've got to say, the first time I went there, I mean, I came up the stairs. I'd never been there before. I came up the stairs and I was like, you know, one of the first times when you go to a football match and it's just like you're just wide-eyed and you see the green pitch and that feeling you get. Honestly, I just looked around and thought, oh my God. And I remember a steward saying to me, "Your first time, is it?" I said, yeah, it is. He goes, "Yeah, I thought so." But every time I go there, I'm gobsmacked how amazing the stadium is. I've been to the training ground a lot more because that's where they do the news conferences. I don't know whether you guys have been to the training ground, have you?
Yeah, we've been lucky enough. We interviewed Jermaine Defoe there over Christmas, and it was listen, the training grounds, it's sensational. It is sensational.
Incredible. Yeah. And so it's, for me, I've not been to Manchester City's one. I haven't been to Leicester's one, which I've heard really, really good things about as well. But from the ones I've seen, it's light years ahead of everyone. It just looks incredible. So it's not surprising that with these two infrastructures that they've got in place, a world-class stadium, a world-class training ground, why wouldn't you value the club at that? And Daniel Levy, in a way, if all of these reports are to be believed, in a way is right in that Tottenham, more often than not in the past few years, are qualifying for the Champions League. So that will add revenue as well to any potential investment, because you're shopping in a different market when you're in the Champions League compared to a Europa League or a Europa Conference League. And clubs have to budget as such, because Tottenham Hotspur, if they qualify for the Champions League, they're suddenly looking at, well, we can cross off those targets because we can go for those ones. Because we can suddenly offer not only an incredible stadium, not only an amazing training ground, but that Champions League music is going to be blaring out at our stadium as well. So it's clear, I think, that they want investment. It's clear that if they do want investment, that they'd want it sooner rather than later. And who knows, if they can get something, you know, sorted out before an ideal scenario would be before a transfer window, right? I mean, absolutely. Obviously, for this one, it's going to be too late, of course. But for the next one, let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. What we are going to do, we are going to go for our first break of the show for our listeners on audio. And I can't believe I'm saying this. Taking you into this break on audio, you're going to hear from Tottenham Hotspur's first signing of the January transfer window. That's from Arnaut Danjuma. Okay. Listen, we'd like to be joined by the wonderful Dharmesh Sheth, broadcaster, journalist, presenter from Sky Sports, and the brilliant Matty Hayes on this last word on Spurs. We've got over 1,000 of you watching us live. So again, thank you so much for all of your incredible support. We're battling live football, which we are always seeming to be doing at last word on Spurs at the moment. But again, your support is incredible for the show. Thank you ever so much. We know it's been a difficult January so far. Listen, let's hope this is just the start of many. And even rightly so, now I hand over to the wonderful Matty Hayes, who's going to be asking Dharmesh about our new first signing. Over to you, Matty.
Well, it only took 25 days, which is an improvement on last January when you had to wait till the deadline day for the double signing of Kulusevski and Bentancur. But Tottenham have completed their first signing of the January window, Dharmesh, with Arnaut Danjuma being brought in on loan from Villarreal until the end of the 2022-23 season. Villarreal, in their statement, confirming that there is an option to buy in that loan deal as well, which is rumoured to be in and around €24 million. Now, in typical Tottenham fashion, it wasn't really done in an easy way at all, with Danjuma doing Peter Odemwingie style visit to training grounds around England, and it looked certain that he was going to be joining Everton. We have reports of him with the media work done, meeting the players in the training ground, everything except the T's crossed and the I's dotted, and all of a sudden, within 24 hours, he was holding up that jersey at Tottenham in a sensational twist, to be honest. And I think the main question that Spurs fans have at the moment, which is one we've kind of had with a lot of our signings in the last couple of years, is where on the list was, if you can tell us, was this player, because Leandro Trossard is one that we were looking at. We've Nicolo Zaniolo as well from Roma that have been mentioned, but it is Danjuma who's come in. Do you know if that was a priority for Tottenham that maybe was just under the radar in the way Paratici likes to do, or is this one that we kind of settled for?
This is a really strange one because, friend of the show, Michael Bridge, and my colleague and friend, he's been following this story really, really closely. And by the sounds of it, this was all in the last week, simply because there wasn't that information earlier on in the window that Arnaut Danjuma was available. But it was kind of made public through his representatives and you very rarely hear something like this happen, that a player under contract is allowed by his club, pop yourself over to the UK, take your representatives, talk to who you want, and sort out a deal for yourself. Like, what? What are you talking about? So then all the money, it was Everton. And Michael was getting like some information about some of the things that Danjuma was saying about Everton. Like, he wants to be a hero for Everton and help them, escape relegation.
Yeah.
And so all we were waiting for was, right, we'll just, we've positioned Vinny O'Connor at Everton's training ground. We're just waiting for Danjuma to arrive. So
I shouldn't laugh.
Suddenly,
I shouldn't laugh.
Yeah, I know. And then it started, then rumours started emerging. Well, hold on, he's either late or he's not turning up. And it got to the point where it's like he's agreed to join. He's about to do his medical. I think there were even some rumours that he's done the media as well. I can't confirm those rumours.
We've heard these similar stories. Yeah.
There was even talk. One report I heard, he's training with them. Like, what is going on?
Should be laughing at this. Yeah. William vibes. Someone's got in the comments there. William vibes. We've been here before with Spurs, but yeah.
So all of this was going on, and then bang, out of nowhere, there's Danjuma. Oh yeah, I'm going to go to Tottenham now. It's like, where did this come from? So either they've been tracking him for months and months and months, or it's an opportunity that they've spotted and thought, you know what, this is actually a no-brainer because we're not committed to buying him. It's a loan. He's got Champions League experience. He's a good player. Let's be honest about it. He is a good player. He's got Premier League experience as well because he was at Bournemouth as well. So all of these factors probably made Tottenham think, this is quite a low-risk signing because we've got a lot of forward players that we're relying on at the moment. What a good player to have just as to provide competition for all of these players that we've got already. So I just think that it was pretty late, and it's pretty much as you saw it as well. I think that's how Tottenham approached it, because I don't even think people knew he was available until he was almost being... He was doing the tour of the UK and saying, look, where can I go? And then ends up at Tottenham. You know what? It could be inspired. It could be inspired.
Yeah, it could be inspired. I mean, do you know what, mate? I'll just get your opinion on him. Look, he's playing the Champions League, 12 appearances, 7 goals in that, obviously that competition. In La Liga of 2020-2021, 82 appearances, 29 goals, 10 assists, 16 goals with his right foot, 13 goals with his left. Matt, honest opinion, how happy are you with his signing?
Look, I'm not going to claim to have expert knowledge on the player. I remember him when he was at Bournemouth. I don't think he's really a player that stood out as one that could be a Champions League player, especially for a Premier League team further down the line. But he's gone to Villarreal and he's done extremely well for himself. You know, he was so influential in their run to the semi-final of the Champions League last season. I've seen criticism of his performance against Liverpool, but you know, it's Liverpool last season when we're one of the best teams in the world. So I don't think you can really judge him based on that. But for me, you're looking at the form of Heung-min Son this season, a player that I'm sure every Spurs fan watching absolutely adores. But you have to look at the facts and look at that he's only scored 4 league goals this season, that we've been so heavily reliant on that link up with Harry Kane over the last couple of seasons, that with that outlet seemingly gone, with Son's pace not quite there, his control, his confidence a little bit depleted, we perhaps need someone who can come in and do a similar job there. And Danjuma is a player who can do that. Like you mentioned there, he's really, really strong on both feet, which is something that we've come to know very well of Heung-min Son. He likes to play on the last man, on the shoulder, has a lot of pace getting in behind, and he knows where the back of the net is. So I think it's a sensible deal. And I think the word that Dharmesh used, just an opportunity that's cropped up in the window, could be exactly what this was. Because that's something Tottenham like to do. They tend to go into the window with a set kind of list of targets and positions they want to go for. But they've always been open to signing a player that they think is an opportunity that's too good to turn down. I think Sergio Reguilon is the best example of that recently, despite the fact that it didn't go too well. But look, it's intriguing. And I think if it goes wrong, there'll be much more of a spotlight shone on how this actually came about. Our first signing the window, it took a player actually turning up at Hotspur Way, knocking on the door and asking for a contract. So that will definitely be looked at if it goes wrong. But it's a player who stylistically seems to fit into what we're lacking in the front line at the moment. So I'm hopeful that it can be a positive one.
Yeah, just a message from the very reliable Paul O'Keefe. Those will know him obviously from Spurs' community on Twitter. Paul suggesting that there is a buy option for Arnaut Danjuma of around 24 million euros. Again, I'm not sure that's a figure you've heard, Dharmesh, but that's what's being reported in and around Spurs circles. But we can obviously wait to see. We'll know more. Let's see the player perform first, and obviously worry about that come the summer. Now, going from one player it took for him to actually arrive at another club to try and sign, Spurs are going completely the other way now and spending 25 days on a window to try and get this man over the line. Pretty what's been the main target all window, one that has caught all the attention of Spurs fans, all hoping this one gets over the line. It appears, Dharmesh, I would say in the last 48 hours from really only apparent speculation, that it is getting closer and closer, and that is Pedro Porro of Sporting. Obviously, we know he's got a release clause of 39 million. We've seen several reports throughout this window that Spurs were looking to potentially cut that figure down. We've heard talk about maybe installments. We know, obviously, from my understanding, that with a release clause in Portugal, you have to pay that all up front in one go. There's not an opportunity to almost pay that in installments. So tell us where we are, Dharmesh, with Pedro Porro, and is he going to be Spurs' second signing of the window?
It's trending towards that direction. It seems positive because the talks are ongoing between Tottenham and Sporting Lisbon for Tottenham to try and sign Pedro Porro. But throughout the whole of this window, Sporting Lisbon were quite stubborn in that they wanted that release clause of 45 million euros. I think it's about 39 million pounds paid up front, or the deal doesn't happen. Now, the fact that talks are ongoing and Tottenham have been reluctant throughout this transfer window to pay that release clause in full up front might suggest that Sporting may relax on that release clause. Now, I'm speaking to a contact of mine in Lisbon who follows Sporting Lisbon very, very closely indeed. He tells me that there is a possibility that Sporting Lisbon may relax on that release clause. It's not definite, but they may, simply because the financial situation at Sporting Lisbon means that, it would be in their interest to basically get this money from Tottenham for Pedro Porro. Now, it's not a done deal, but it is sounding like that there is progress being made on it. Tottenham have been in the market for a right wing back throughout the whole of this transfer window, bizarrely, where they're well stocked in that position. But it just seems that Antonio Conte doesn't fully trust the three players that he's got there in Jed Spence, in Doherty and in Emerson Royal. If they were to bring this signing in, and I think the board do want to back him, they want to back Antonio Conte in this transfer window. And if you think about it, Antonio Conte, and I know Matt touched on this in his last answer there, he's got built up a bit of credit compared to what happened this time last year, because I don't think many Tottenham fans going into the January transfer window were expecting Tottenham to end up in the top four. Yes, they'd got Antonio Conte and they thought, right, we've got a chance, but I don't think there was an expectation that they would. Then they made two signings, the ones you mentioned, in Bentancur and Kulusevski. They are transformative signings for the rest of the season. They turned Tottenham into being thereabouts in the top four to being there in the top four. If Tottenham can get 2 or 3 signings over the line in this transfer window, and if they can be as transformative, I think that negativity will just relent a little bit, because I think they're still in with a big chance of getting that top 4. People will say, what are you talking about? Tottenham are never going to get top 4. But like we keep saying, they're only 3 points off it. And they came from behind to pip Arsenal this time in the last season to get top 4. Why can't they do it again? With Pedro Porro, it just looks like it is trending towards that. I just think if Sporting Lisbon did not want to do a deal or did not want to negotiate, we wouldn't be hearing about these talks ongoing. If they wanted the release clause, and the release clause paid up front, all in one hit, regardless, we wouldn't be having talks. Now, I'm not saying that Tottenham won't reach that release clause of £39 million, but there might be talks going on now on them saying, let's pay you an initial fee of this much. Let's pay you achievable add-ons, depending on appearances, on, trophies potentially, and we'll make it up. Nice. Make it up to that £39 million. There's different ways of doing a deal. And I just wonder whether Sporting Lisbon will think, if we don't take that money now, are there still going to be enough suitors later on down the line who are willing to pay that release clause? If Tottenham can get close to it, this is what my contact has said in Portugal. If Tottenham get close enough to that release clause and make it up in add-ons, etc., then he thinks that Sporting Lisbon would do that deal. So I'm not saying, I don't want to get any hopes up and saying it's definitely going to happen, but I can only tell you the information that I'm getting. Yep. And the information appears to be positive that the deal can get done on this one.
Okay, well, let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that it continues to trend in the direction which Dharmesh suggests. Matty, let's hand back over to you.
Yeah, we've touched on it quite a bit throughout this show, and I think in every show we've really done this month, Ricky, but the uncertainty around the future of Tottenham and with the manager, the director of football, and with the potential QSI investment with the ownership. Do you think, Dharmesh, that is making it even more predictable to look at what Tottenham might potentially do in this window? I mean, like I mentioned earlier, and you mentioned the target of a right back, they seem to have their main targets of an attacker and a right wing back in this window, and maybe any other opportunities that could crop up. But do you think if we can get this Pedro Porro deal over the line on top of Danjuma, that could be Spurs done? Or is there that unpredictability that at any moment anything can happen?
From the outset of the window, it was always, like you said, the right wing back and the forward. They've got the forward in Danjuma. They're working really hard to get that right wing back in Pedro Porro. It could be it. It could be it. But you just never know with Tottenham, because they do like a late deal. And I think every club is going to be keeping their eyes open. I've got to be honest with you. After the summer we saw and the amount of money that was spent by a lot of Premier League clubs, including Tottenham, Manchester United, Chelsea, they were spending hundreds of millions of pounds. I was expecting it to be a little bit less busy this time, but one can't legislate for what Chelsea is doing. It's just, I haven't seen anything like it. It's just incredible. It's like the second window of his tenure, Todd Burley, hasn't even finished, and it's close to £500 million. And I think what's happening as well, it's distorting the market a little bit as well, because you're finding like Mudryk has gone for 88.5 million. And I know we've seen him for only about 15 minutes and he looked incredible. But I think a lot of clubs are now using Mudryk as maybe that's the base. Well, if he went for 88.5 million, he's only played this many Champions League games, he's only played this many games full stop, then I think we should be valuing our player at this much. And whenever a Premier League club goes in for a signing, the prices are always going to go up. With regard to Tottenham, look, I think they're always in the market for players. They have to be, because they know this is one of the most competitive leagues we've seen. There are so many teams now that can battle for the top 4. You don't want to hear it, but I mean, look, I think Arsenal and City are away. I think I don't know what order they're going to finish in, but you could safely say that they're going to be in the Champions League. Then there's 2 other places which you could argue are up for grabs. But how many teams are in for those places? People are saying, well, Liverpool are out of it. Are they? Once their injured players come back, They are capable. They've shown in the last 3 or 4 years that they can go on a run and get into the top 4. Newcastle were probably not expected to be where they are at the start of the season. They're in the mix. Chelsea, once their players gel, could they yet make a late run into the top 4? Manchester United are occupying one of those places. So, you could argue that it's not just a big 6 anymore, it's a big 7. And Tottenham, to keep their place in that bracket, they're going to need to be active in the window. And yes, they've left it late, but if they can get these 2 over the line, one is already done, and Porro, and who knows, another surprise, maybe on deadline day. I don't know. I haven't got any information on it. I promise you, I'm not holding anything back. But you wouldn't put it past Tottenham because they've got a history of trying to do a deal. There's a situation why people always say, well, why are Tottenham always doing these late deals? Why are they doing it? Because the hierarchy at Tottenham, whatever you think about them, they always seem to act when it comes to the finances of the club, they feel is in the best interest of the club. So they'll try and get the best deal that they possibly can. They won't do what Chelsea are doing simply by saying, right, it's 8.5 million. That's your asking price. Here you go. There it is. No, they want to negotiate because they know if they're selling a player, a buying club is going to do exactly the same thing to them. So they need to be in a position where they are spending, but spending within the means that is going to take them forward in a responsible, sensible manner, but still being able to compete with these other clubs, which is getting increasingly more difficult. The more investment these other clubs are getting, the takeover talk of Liverpool, United, the new takeover of Newcastle, the existing takeover of Manchester City, and then what Arsenal are doing as well. There's so much competition now. Tottenham need to be in that mix when it comes to transfer windows. So 2, I think, will come in. Don't rule out another one.
Before Matty comes back in there, I hear what you're saying, Dharmesh. I think the thing that really frustrates me as a fan with Spurs is that we arguably had 2 of our biggest games of the month near the start of it in terms of Arsenal and City. And you just think now, if we are going to end up buying Porro for the release clause, which we could have done at the start of the month, I think me, like a lot of Spurs fans, are sitting there thinking, well, why did we not get these players in when we had the 2 big games, Arsenal and City? I know, again, the 2 very hard fixtures are going to be the 2 best teams in the league at the moment. But I think that's where there is a frustration with Spurs where, look, we may go on and get these players, but the argument is we've missed a great opportunity there with 6 points up for grabs that Spurs failed to address the squad in the early days. And I know, again, it's a window, it's a negotiation, it's a domino effect, Dharmesh. I've heard you say it so many times on Sky. It takes one deal then to ignite another, and then another, and then another. But it would be nice for Spurs to be proactive rather than reactive. And that's the way it just feels around Spurs just generally in a transfer window. But look, I'll hand back over to Matty. Matty, let's come back over to you.
I just want to follow on quickly the point you were making there, Ricky. What frustrates me most about that is you look at the run that we had last January. I think was a couple of days before deadline day, then a couple of days after deadline day, we lost at home to Wolves and Southampton. And then our next game was against Manchester City. I think after the 3 defeats to Chelsea as well, we were looking at, I think, 4 defeats in a row for Conte for the first time in his career. And we're going to the Etihad. There's absolutely no hope. And it was Kulusevski and Bentancur that, along with a world-class performance from Harry Kane, that pushed us onto that victory. So like the blueprint is there for how Spurs can push on after a January window to get into the top 4. It's just so frustrating that we seem to be having the same conversation every year. But look, back to potential another signing. If there is to be a third signing for Tottenham, the most concrete links that we're having at the moment, aside from the 2 we've already discussed, and Leandro Trossard, who's gone to the other side of North London, is Nicolo Zaniolo from Roma. Now, there are reports that he might prefer to stay in Italy and make a move to Tottenham's next Champions League opponents, AC Milan. But there's no hiding that Antonio Conte has been an admirer of the player for a long time, as have Spurs and Fabio Paratici. Dharmesh, do you understand, I suppose, firstly, that Zaniolo does want to stay in Italy? And do you think Tottenham could try and move for him as well as Danjuma?
I think Tottenham would be in the market for him. I don't think, from all the information I have, that it was one or the other. But I'll defer to my colleague, Gianluca Di Marzio at Sky in Italy, who was reporting on this particular deal. And it seemed that Tottenham wanted to do a deal whereby it was a loan with an option or / an obligation. Whereas I think if Roma were even to consider any kind of departure for Zaniolo, it would have had to have been a big money departure on a permanent deal rather than just losing him quite late in the window now, admittedly, because it was starting to materialize in the last couple of weeks. Because you've got to remember as well, when clubs are doing transfers, yes, they want to get as much money as they can, but on the flip side, sometimes deals don't happen because it happens so late in the window that no matter how much money is being talked about, it's all well and good having that money, but one, you're going to lose the player, but then how much time are you going to have to spend that money? And if you do go into the market once you've got a lot of money for a player, think about what a selling club is going to do to you then. Oh, we notice you've got £50 million burning a hole in your pocket. This player that you want to buy, it was going to be 20, but you know what? It's 27 for you now because you've got all of this money. I don't want to say that domino effect again, but it is that kind of feeling when you do transfer deals. And that might be, I'm not defending Tottenham in any way when I say this, but there are lots of other factors that come into it as opposed to it being as easy as to say, well, if we're going to get Pedro Porro, why don't we just do it at the start of the window? Because they want to negotiate. They probably have a valuation. Tottenham have a valuation of the player. There is a release clause for the player. Now, the release clause everybody knows about, but do Tottenham feel that that release clause is a realistic release clause? And do they feel that it can be negotiated upon? They probably thought that they could because they didn't go in with that release clause full on right at the start of the window. Now, they're obviously negotiating because the talks are ongoing. Let's see if they manage to get below that release clause, because then you'll be able to make a better judgment on, well, why didn't they just do that at the start of the window if they were going to pay the £39 million anyway? Because if they've managed to do a deal where the initial payment is lower and the rest of it is based on conditions, then maybe there might be an element of understanding of why that they've decided to approach this particular signing in that way. But with the Danjuma one, I think that's more of a relevant argument because it seems like it was almost the other way around because he was being offered to everyone and it only happened in the last week. And I think Tottenham fans were a bit frustrated that the way it was reported was, they went in for Trossard and then it was almost, laughed out, the bid that they'd made, and they didn't actually go back in for him. So how serious were they about bringing him in? Was it a, like, let's go all out and try and get Leandro Trossard? Or was it, look, we're looking at him. He's one of a number of options that we're looking at. So let's see what would have happened with it. But I think it's probably, I always say it's probably best to judge a transfer window, however frustrated Spurs fans are just now that they wanted the deals done early, probably to judge it at the end of the window. Probably not what you want to hear, but...
Fair. Matty, we'll carry on with you, Matt. I know you've got a question in regards to Spurs' what actually happens in the event of Porro joining. What happens to those players that are currently in that position, Matty?
I think you touched on it earlier, Dharmesh, the sheer volume of players that we have at right wing back with Emerson Royal, Matt Doherty, and the summer signing Jed Spence already at Antonio Conte's disposal. There have been some conflicting reports today about whether or not a couple of Premier League clubs are interested in taking Spence on loan, namely Leicester and Brentford. I suppose, do you expect all three of those to remain at Tottenham if Spurs are to be successful in their pursuit of Pedro Porro?
So the information that I've got is that Porro arriving is completely independent of any departures. It's not a case of Porro comes so we can let Jed Spence go. I don't think that's the case at all. If you think about the position that Tottenham are in at the moment, they've got three right wing backs on their books. One of them is Jed Spence, who is hardly playing. And it makes you question, when you go back to the summer, I'm sure you guys have been talking about this, probably one of the hot topics when you talk about that position. Why isn't he playing? And probably closely followed by, it's probably not Conte signing this, is it? So those are two things that people are normally talking about when they talk about Jed Spence. Because he hasn't been playing, I think they've been open to a loan for Jed Spence since the beginning of the window. And I don't think it's dependent on whether Pedro Porro arrives or not. So if for whatever reason Porro doesn't arrive at Tottenham, I still think there is that possibility that Jed Spence will be allowed to go out on loan because he's not using him. And he's already got 2 players in that position. Ideal scenario, he wants Pedro Porro in that position, and he'll probably have Emerson Royal and Doherty as competition for him. So we'll still have 3 players in that position, but he'll have his primary target there playing their most games. But then Jed Spence will be allowed to go out on loan, probably to a Premier League club. And I think when it's easy, when fans talk about, or just send him out on loan. I think clubs think about the loan market quite a bit, not only bringing players in, but where their players go. Because not only does it have to suit the club financially, but it has to suit the player as well. But it has to be to a club, I think, where Tottenham will feel he's going to be playing regularly, number one, and probably in a style that's not too dissimilar to how Tottenham are playing. So when he does return from that loan, it's not a case of, well, I've been playing this way for the last 6 months. I can't adapt to the way Spurs are playing.
Can I make you laugh, Dharmesh? Based on our playing style, he won't find it too hard to find another club. I tell you, you go down to the Championship or League One or League Two. If we see the playing style of Tottenham at the moment, trust me, he won't find it hard to find a club. Definitely my words, not Darwish's words, but it makes me laugh. Playing style with Tottenham. If someone could tell me what our playing style is, that'd be lovely.
I think I meant more generally for a football club. Let's leave it at that.
Top man. Okay, we'll wait and see what happens with him. Oh, I'm sorry, that did make me laugh, Darvish. I have to say that made me laugh. My fault, not yours. Watching this team the last 8 months, I tell you, it's been bloody tough, trying to be the most politest way. In terms of other potential departures, I mean, one player that again has been in the spotlight this season, Dharmesh, is Hugo Lloris. Look, I think we've got to put on record, never easy for a player that has been part of a World Cup final to suffer defeat mentally and then just be thrown straight back into a day-to-day Premier League team where, again, his head's on the chopping block every single game. But you would have seen it, Dharmesh. He's made a number of high-profile mistakes this season. I mean, he's come out recently defending actually his form and just said, look, I mean, he said he actually deflections on a couple of them. But look, he's a man that's a captain. He's a leader. He's a winner, of course. So he'll be feeling it as much as anybody that, he don't want to see his name next to the word mistakes or errors. Yeah. So look, I mean, there has been reports that Spurs might accelerate their efforts to replace Hugo Lloris. We've heard names, namely of Brentford's David Raya, Brighton's Robert Sanchez, both of whom excel in possession. And of course, Jordan Pickford of Everton, you could probably arguably say he's a player that you pick up for maybe a decent price, given the fact that we understand talks are currently stalled with Everton on a new contract. Do you think this is more one for the summer, Dharmesh? Or again, you mentioned that word opportunities.
Yeah, I mean,
this window, what do you reckon?
You mentioned accelerate. I don't think it'll be accelerated to bring someone in the next 6 days unless something materializes. I can't see that happening for like a long-term target becoming available, because you're effectively talking about not someone to provide competition for Lloris, but almost becoming the new number one at Tottenham. And it's very, very difficult, just generally, I should speak here, for in a January transfer window to do business, particularly when you're going for high-profile targets, because a selling club is going to have their own ambitions. So why would they want to release some of their best players mid-season? That's one difficulty anyway. And prices are always higher in January because of it's mid-season. And when a Premier League club gets involved with any kind of transfer, particularly with a club from abroad, let alone Premier League club to Premier League club, the price only goes one way or always goes up. So I think this will be something that they will try and address in the summer. I've heard all the names that you have. David Raya is one. And with Raya, I think he's going to be entering the final year of his contract come the summer. And I think that he's actually come out and said that he will go through the rest of this season with Brentford, and then he will assess where his future is going in the summer. Because look, they love him at Brentford. Thomas Frank loves him. He's happy at Brentford. He's performing brilliantly. But if he's got ambitions with respect to Brentford to play maybe Champions League football or European football, then, it's something that he's going to have to think about. Robert Sanchez, another one. Brighton. I mean, they must be sick of us, Brighton, honestly, on the transfer show. I promise you. I'm almost having to like say something in defense after I've said something about them, because it always seems to be, all right, Moise Caicedo, what's going to happen with Alexis McAllister? Leandro Trossard's gone. Oh, Roberto Sanchez, he's been linked as well. Like, their model is absolutely incredible. Buying for low prices and selling for absolutely 100, 200, 300, 400% profit. Robert Sanchez will go for a lot of money if he was to leave Brighton. Now, I don't want to say he's going to leave Brighton, but he is going to be one of the players, one of the keepers that all of these big clubs are going to look at, like David Raya. But I think as far as Tottenham are concerned, the goalkeeping position, I think, will remain the same post this transfer window, and then they will look at it again in the summer. Make no mistake about it, though. They'll be doing their due diligence now on goalkeepers, on centre halves, on midfield, on forwards, the whole time, because a club like Tottenham will want to evolve all the time. They can't just go into a transfer window and say, all right, what are we going to do? The planning will have gone into that kind of work long before. So they will have their targets well in advance of the summer, I think.
From one end of the pitch to another, with the signing of Danjuma, I think some Spurs fans are expecting we might see a departure at that end of the pitch. Two players in particular. One is Bryan Hill, who, if Tottenham had been more successful in the summer window, we probably would have been watching in a Valencia jersey this season. Some reports that he maybe let go out on loan this window, and also Lucas Moura, who is set to leave Tottenham at the end of his contract anyway. But again, some talk that he may actually be able to get out of the club this window. Have you heard anything about either of those two players?
Yeah, so I think Tottenham would be open to listening to any kind of offer for those two players. If you look at the forward options they've got now with Danjuma, you're looking at Kulusevski as well, Son, Richarlison and Kane. So Bryan Hill, even before Danjuma arrived, was struggling to get regular first-team football. He's only going to be pushed further down the pecking order with the fact that there are now 5 forwards available to Tottenham. I think they'd be open to offers, and I think there will be offers for him. Teams in Spain love Bryan Hill. They will want to bring him in on loan until the end of the season. I just go back to the summer, you mentioned it there. I think Tottenham were open then, but I think Conte really likes him. He likes his attitude. He trains. He's a great professional. He wasn't one of the infamous 4, was he? He wasn't in the Reguilon, Ndombele, Lo Celso, Winks camp. He was still training with the first team squad, but in the knowledge that if a suitable offer came along, combined with a replacement coming in for Bryan Hill, then he'd be allowed to go. Whereas those other 4, I think they didn't need a replacement. Conte decided they're not going to be part of the squad, so they can go. Actually, I don't need replacements for them because I've got my squad and they're not in the squad. Whereas Kiel was in the squad and it would have been a 1-in, 1-out situation in the summer. Hence why he didn't go then. I think this time they'll be more open to it simply because Danjuma has arrived and they've got a lot more options up front. With regard to Lucas Moura, yeah, you're right. I mean, end of the season, his contract is up. They had an option for a further 12 months, but they're not taking it up.
No.
And so he'll be gone in the summer. But I think if a suitable offer was to come in January, then I think, Tottenham would probably do business on Lucas Moura as well, simply because, they might be able to make a bit of money. He's free to talk to clubs outside England now ahead of a free transfer in the summer, or someone could get a good deal with Lucas Moura in January, not spend too much money, and Tottenham would probably look at it and think, well, we're going to get nothing for him. He's unlikely to play. He's injured quite a bit just now. So let's try and cash in as much as we can. So I think those two, there might be something, in those two potentially leaving for the rest of this window alongside Jed Spence as well.
Dharmesh, just ask you about centre-half at Spurs. Now, interestingly, at the start of the month, at the start of January, Conte seemed to rule out a move for a centre-back. We've seen in that time this season with Eric Dyer in and out of form, Davinson Sanchez, quite frankly, dropping down that pecking order quite frequently. Japhet Tanganga, I know that great Sky documentary that you featured on prominently, seems to be considered as a backup at the moment. Clement Longley, obviously, on loan from Barcelona without an option to buy it. There's maybe a hint there based on his current form that Spurs will probably look towards maybe a replacement for him in the summer. What do you think, Dharmesh? I mean, another name that's been mentioned, I think you mentioned him on the previous show, you actually came on for us in the summer, was Piero Hincapié of Bayer Leverkusen. Do you think, Dharmesh, in these next few days, there could be a surprise of a centre-half arriving at Hotspur Way?
I think rather like the goalkeeping situation, I think that will be addressed again in the summer. You mentioned Longley. It is a straight loan, as you say, no option, but he is a left-footed central defender. They seem to be gold dust, don't they, at the moment in world football? Nearly every club is after that kind of player. Arsenal have just got one in Kivior to provide backup for Gabriel. I think Tottenham, that is one of the big priorities come the summer. And Piero Hincapié, is one of the names that's been mentioned to me that they want to go for in the summer. Napoli are interested in him as well. That will all depend on what they do as well, because they've got Kim Min-jae in the centre of their defence, who's just joined, who's a fantastic centre half, but he's attracting interest from the Premier League now as well. So if potentially he was to get a move to the Premier League, I think Napoli would go all out to try and get Hincapié, but he is definitely, as far as I'm aware, on Tottenham's list. Bastoni is another name that simply doesn't go away, but he seems to be linked very closely to Paratici and Antonio Conte. And I think some of these summer moves that we're talking about, how many of them are dependent on what the managerial situation and what the director of football situation is going to look like at Tottenham come the summer? Because I think, is it a case that they'll have to make two plans? One where Antonio Conte and Fabio Paratici are driving the transfer business in the summer? Or is it another plan if Conte decides, look, time's up? But I think what is imperative for Tottenham is they need to know, even if it's not made public, they need to know privately at least who the manager is going to be next season, who the director of football is going to be next season, as soon as possible. I know it's an obvious thing to say, but it is so imperative just now, because when you're talking about players and they're having talks with a football club, one of the factors, we will talk about, he's going to get paid this much and all they care about is money. It's not always the case. They want to know who they're going to be playing for, because if they're signing for a particular manager and that manager is not going to be there when they actually join, it's like they've been sold something that's not come to fruition. So they could turn around and say, well, this is not what I signed up for. So I think there needs to be an element of certainty now, sooner rather than later, with regard to what's happening at Tottenham.
I think it's spot on, Dharmesh, if I can just come in there for one sec before Matt asked you about Harry, because today we see obviously Arnaut Danjuma coming out saying, look, I'm really looking forward to working with Conte. He's got so much experience as a manager. For me, he's developing, obviously, players, and it gives me the opportunity to learn off him. And then, obviously, Spurs in the summer are going to be welcoming Destiny Udogie, a player that you feel was precisely signed for somebody like Antonio Conte, who he's going to work with, who he's going to improve.
Yeah.
And this is where, Dharmesh, it links back to the point you've just made there, is why there is, I think, such an element of frustration around the fan base. And again, you make the point of Arsenal being top. That, again, adds to that frustration where we're currently in the middle of a project where we have not got any real certainty over the manager, over the sporting director. And then you turn your glances and eyes to down the road. They have seemingly got a project there that it looks very much in alignment, unity. The fans are united, the board are united, the club, the players. And it kind of refers back to the fact that unless you have all of those layers in place, I don't think it's easy to be successful. And I totally agree with the point you're making that we do need clarity, 100% on the manager. And let's hope, Dharmesh, from your mouth to God's ears, we're going to get that as soon as possible. I'm going to hand back to Matty, who's going to ask you a couple of questions before we look to close out. Matty, over to you.
There's honestly no better way to move into the next question, because it's about Harry Kane and his future and a potential contract at Spurs. One of Tottenham's many meltdowns in the fan base this month has been around some reports about Harry Kane's future and where he might be plying his trade next season. We've got some more positive reports in the last couple of days, I think mainly from David Ornstein and Alistair Gold, that Harry Kane, it remains one of his biggest aims to be successful, but specifically at Tottenham. Seemingly open to having talks about his contract after the January transfer window. I think your colleague in Germany, Florian Plettenberg, has said that Bayern Munich at this point seem to be kind of accepting the fact that Harry Kane will be. It's unlikely he'll be moving out to Germany to join them. I think it just really does tie back into what we're saying there about needing to know who Tottenham's manager is next season. Do you think, Dharmesh, that the futures of Harry Kane and Antonio Conte are intertwined, or could Kane maybe potentially stay on if it is to be a return for Pochettino or a new man being brought in the summer?
I'm not entirely convinced. It will depend on whether Conte stays or not, because I'll just go back to when he signed that long-term deal initially. And that was probably influenced by the fact that everyone at Tottenham was aligned then, and that Mauricio Pochettino was the long-term project. Tottenham were challenging for the title, let alone the top four. They were challenging for the title. They're getting to the Champions League final. They were qualifying for the Champions League. And Harry Kane then saw a project with Mauricio Pochettino to think, this is where it's at. This is where we can develop. But it all kind of coincided with, like, you know, the purchase of the stadium, which obviously is going to take a lot of finance. And there was a couple of those windows where Tottenham famously didn't sign anybody, but yet they were still successful. And they maybe thought, well, look, Pochettino's magic, to coin a phrase of a song that I think you guys used to sing. So I think it was influenced then, but it fell apart so quickly, because from being like what should have been the beginning of something absolutely amazing, that Champions League final, I think I've mentioned this to you before on this podcast, it felt like, in hindsight, it was the end of a certain journey for Tottenham. When you look at the two teams that were in that Champions League final, Liverpool, it kind of was the platform for them, whereas it felt like Tottenham had got to the top of the mountain and that was the top. Whereas ideally it was like, it should have been the middle of it. Look what else we can go on to achieve. And if you had said on the eve of the Champions League final that 6 months later, the manager who had taken you to the Champions League final would not be your manager anymore, you just simply would not have believed it. And I think Harry Kane probably would not have believed it. But he went into those contract negotiations in good faith, I think, to think, look, this is the long-term project. This club is going somewhere. And I'm not saying they haven't gone anywhere, but it's probably not gone in the direction that Harry probably envisaged it would. And we know all about the contract and the famous, you know, there was no release clause, etc. And so Tottenham had every right to keep him, even though last summer there was all that talk about Manchester City. Is he going to go? Is he going to stay? Is he happy? Is he not happy? Well, to me, I mean, you watch him week in, week out, he seems happy. He seems happy at the club. And the noises that, you know, the guys that you mentioned there seem a little bit more positive about what Harry Kane wants to do next in his career. But I think he's going to need to sit down and get assurances of the direction of the club. I mean, you guys are asking the question nearly every single day that you haven't got that certainty as fans where the club is going, who the manager is going to be, the director of football is going to be. Imagine if you're a player who's currently at Tottenham, they've probably got those same questions in their mind as well, which will obviously influence a potential decision on a contract negotiation. And make no mistake about it, he's got 18 months left on his deal. This is going to be probably the last big contract or move that he makes in his career. He has to get this one right. He wants to achieve so much more in his career. He's had that absolute accolade of being captain of England in major tournaments. Of course, he wants to be that guy who is at Tottenham when he's breaking the Premier League goal scoring record, when he's winning trophies for Tottenham. And I think that individual record as well can't be underestimated, because he's getting closer to that. And I know Florian Plettenberg had kind of said, look, the Bayern Munich thing has gone a little bit cold. I would be I'd be surprised if he was to go abroad when he's this close to breaking what would be a monumental record.
Yeah. Again, I think you say, Dharmesh, you have to probably wait and see how those negotiations pan out. Before Matt comes and asks you the final $1 million question before we let you go, and again, it's been a wonderful show. I must just say, I've had about 1,400 of you watching us live right now with the wonderful Dharmesh Sheth. Again, thank you so much for all of your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. We're also joined by the wonderful Matty Hayes as well here. One name that is continually cropping up, and I'm being implored to ask you about, Dharmesh, is that of Milan Skriniar. Now, I think this is a player that, look, you've been on the show a couple of times now, Dharmesh. It's one that I think we've asked you about quite a number of times. What we understand, I think PSG are flexing their muscles. They look close for him. The question coming out is, this feels like desperate to ask Dharmesh. This man's on Sky Sports News. I'm asking him this question. I feel like an idiot. Dharmesh, if PSG back off, feels like he's in a fight here. If PSG back off, will Tottenham run away with a star prize? Will Spurs have a chance of signing Milan Skriniar? Do you know how stupid I feel asking this question?
I don't want to commit to that either way, simply because I think the noises coming out of Italy now is that Inter are open to letting him go and almost wanting him to go because of the contract situation that he's in just now and the non-signing of a new contract. So I don't know how you want me to answer this one, because whatever I say, there's like, I can only get into trouble. So let's just say if PSG are in for him, they're unlikely to back off. I've left myself enough wriggle room in that, I think.
I think you've done well there, Dom. So if something happens on deadline day, then more than enough, and we will not remind you of Last Word on Spurs when you came. We'll just tell you in the summer. Matty, let's come over to you to close what's been a wonderful show with Dharmesh. Over to you, mate.
I love asking this question at the end of every show, and Ricky, I always have to thank you for letting me get this one. But Dharmesh, it's been a fantastic show, and I've really enjoyed your company. But I want to see you squirm when I ask this question. How many players do you think Tottenham will have brought in when the window slams shut in a week's time?
The window always slams shut, doesn't it? It doesn't just close slowly. Yeah,
it's too good a phrase.
You're there, Dharmesh, to close it. I mean, you're always there to close it.
It actually doesn't slam shut, because I'll tell you why. Because at 11 o'clock, everyone thinks it's over, but then these deal sheets come along, and then it's just like, oh, the window's slightly open again. So yeah, it kind of just like closes slowly, creaking.
I think that's one thing that's on every person's deadline day bingo card is the deal sheet explanation. I love it. Yeah. Oh dear. Don't. You see, I'm trying to squirm out of this question.
Absolutely.
I'm going to give you the safe answer. I'm going to say. I'm going to say 2.
Okay.
I know. I saw some messages go along saying, "Oh, I hope you're right. We'll sign someone late on deadline day." I'm going to say 2.
I know, Dom, there's a lot of Spurs people that work at Sky Sports who are probably going to be listening to you, watching you right now, come up to you tomorrow morning, giving you that look to say, oh, he's left himself open for wiggle room there.
Yeah. No wriggle room here. 2.
I think people we're having some 4. I mean, do you know what Tottenham Hotspur do in a January window? You'll be lucky with 4. Some of the comments coming through here. Look, it has been a wonderful show. It has been brilliant. I'm sure, Matt, you agree. Brilliant having Dharmesh back on Last Word on Spurs. I always say, bringing Dharmesh Sheth on. I know Dharmesh, I'm always saying this, but it is iconic for us. You know, listen, the truly wonderful broadcaster, presenter, journalist who I think, listen, all of us watch and are glued to Sky Sports News during the January and summer window. I know, listen, Dharmesh, we're glued to it all year round. Of course we are, but it is superb. Matt, I'm sure you agree. Brilliant having Dharmesh back on the show tonight.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's Dharmesh and Cavi and Sky, and the whole team there are just so synonymous with the transfer window, and I think every fan across the UK and Ireland always tunes in for the incredible insight. So it was a real pleasure to be able to have the chat about transfers with you tonight, Dharmesh, and I'm hoping that number might increase in the next 6 days.
Mate, absolute pleasure. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Ricky. Thanks for your kind words. Really appreciate it.
Honestly, Dharmesh, just a reminder, like anyone needs a reminder here, where can they find you, Dharmesh, if they don't know who you are, which I fail to believe is possible. On socials, you're talking about? Socials, TV, wherever you want to name.
So Sky Sports News, first and foremost. Transfer shows at 5 o'clock and at 7 o'clock every weekday, Monday to Friday. And I just put in there, if anyone's asking if I get on with Carve, I do. He's my friend. And also on Twitter at Sky Sports_Sheth. And I've just joined Instagram. Yeah, taken the plunge at Sky Sports_Sheth on that as well. So yeah, that's where you'll find me.
There's no excuse. We've got over 1,000 watching us live now. Go and follow Dharmesh on Instagram and be nice. be nice, and follow him to make
Yes,
sure we've
please,
got the
please,
latest
please,
on Spurs' transfers. It's been an absolute pleasure. Join by the wonderful Matty Hayes, broadcaster, journalist, and iconic presenter, the wonderful Dharmesh Sheth. Guys, please keep safe, keep well. Thank you so much for, again, all of your incredible support. We're back with you very, very soon on Last One on Spurs. And as always, come on, you Spurs.